I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. It is very uncommon that the government creates a program of this kind of size at a moment like this. That led to an extremely rapid formation of a more mature market. A year ago, no deals had closed. And now we're talking about all these deals that are closing across all kinds of different credit categories and sizes. I hope a year from now, we're on track to building something like $3 trillion of energy infrastructure and manufacturing capabilities here in the US.
Hi, folks. I'm Conor Gaughan, and welcome to Consensus in Conversation, a podcast where we're talking to the innovators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who are committed to building successful businesses that also help us build a better world. As you may recall, we republished our 2023 interview with Alfred Johnson of Crux a few weeks ago. We wanted to set the stage for the conversation that he and I recorded at the American Clean Power Association's 2024 conference in Minneapolis. Well, our Consensus in Conversation Live had some tech difficulties. And so last week, Alfred and I jumped back on the phone to re-record a brand new 2024 update. Alfred and Crux have spent the last year helping to define and build an exciting new market in tax credits. Today, we'll catch up with him on all he's seen, learned, and built since his initial launch last year. So without further ado, here's the latest from Alfred Johnson and Crux. Sir, how's it going? Welcome back.
Good to be here, Connor. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm just going to tee this up for folks. We had a really great conversation a couple weeks ago, live in the flesh in Minneapolis at the ACP Clean Power Expo, and there was some technical difficulties, and so we lost the whole episode. But the good news, the silver lining here is I get to spend another hour catching up with you, which is great, so I'll take it.
It's always good to have a dress rehearsal, you know?
We'll sound so much smarter this time around, I promise.
Yeah, I hope so. Probably not.
So it's been almost a year since we had you on for the first time. And I'm excited for everyone to get the full update. There's a lot of cool stuff, but I do want to start for folks that maybe didn't hear our first episode. Give them kind of your quick biography just so people can get oriented to you.
Yeah, so Connor, basically everything that I have done has been at the intersection of software, financial markets, and the government. I went to Treasury at the beginning of my career working on the financial crisis. Tim Geithner had stood up a small team led by a guy named Lee Sachs, who was doing the crisis response, which looked like the building of the financial stability plan, the stress tests, all those things. Amazing first experience in financial markets, getting to understand the system when the system is breaking is a rare privilege. And then started working on the Recovery Act, which was my first exposure into these clean energy tax credits. At the time, the Recovery Act was the largest piece of clean energy legislation that had been passed, though it was under the auspice of fiscal support in the wake of the crisis. So I got to know these credits, went into the White House, worked for Bill Daley when he was President Obama's chief of staff. It's actually a fun full circle moment. We announced last week that Bill is joining our team as a senior advisor.
I saw that.
Which
awesome.
Is so awesome to get to work with him again. So having a lot of fun with that. So after working for Bill, went back to business school, went to BlackRock. At the time, they had a structured finance advisory practice working with official institutions. So at the time, the European financial crisis was raging. I was working with some central banks over there and also US domestic banks that were relating to new rules that had come out post-crisis, Dodd-Frank, higher capital requirements, things like that. Got into tech after that, had always enjoyed working on small teams, went to a fintech company. And then in 2017, built and scaled and later sold a marketplace software company called Mobilize that built event management software in the context of a network. After we sold the company with my now co-founder for the second time, Allen Kramer, I went back into the Treasury Department working on the COVID response, the financial markets issues that were facing the department at the time, technology issues as Deputy Chief of Staff to Secretary Yellen. Left in the summer of 22, really wanted to start another business, and particularly in climate. And then in that period, the IRA passed, and we started looking deeply at the tax credits, which are roughly 2/3 of that very large and important law, and have built Crux to make the market for those credits deep, liquid, and efficient, in the belief that if we do that, we're going to drive capital into clean energy and advanced manufacturing at scale at a time we really need it.
And we're going to dig into a lot of, I think, the details around the tax credit marketplace today. But one story we didn't talk about last time, but I've since read, is about your attempted summit at Mount Marcus Baker. And I was curious if you would indulge us. I think it's an interesting story, and I'm just curious about that experience. It might give folks an insight into kind of you, the person, and for how you think about the world and tackle big challenges that lie ahead.
Wow, Connor, that's a fun one. I haven't been asked that in a while. So context here was I had just worked in the Treasury in the White House. It was early in my career. I was 22 to 25, had applied to business school, had gotten in, and really wanted to step back, technologically detox and frankly get in good shape prior to going to graduate school. And I read about Knowles, the National Outdoor Leadership School, which did these classes of various levels of difficulty. And I don't think I read the fine print, which is also kind of indicative. So this particular class was called Alaska Mountaineering, and it was an advanced class. And what we were doing was attempting to summit the third largest peak in Alaska, called Mount Marcus Baker. The entire time was on the Matanuska Glacier, so we were ice camping for all of it. We ultimately did not make the summit because of weather and had to go back down, but really fun first experience. And I guess sort of like, fun in a type 2 sense, because most of the time we were just sort of like walking in a long line attached by ropes to one another in case somebody fell through the ice. So like lots of time for thinking and reflection, but did what I intended to do. It was really good for detoxing and getting in shape and, feeling good about health before going into graduate school, which does not necessarily emphasize those things.
Have you done any mountaineering since?
I spent a lot of time in Idaho. And so out here, we do a lot of hiking and some, very basic non-technical climbing kind of stuff, but nothing like that.
Yeah, I love this story. Okay, so we can get into the nuts and bolts around Crux. Again, let's just set the stage for folks, because, a year ago when we were talking, this marketplace was just being born. There weren't quite rules yet set up from departments. What is Crux at its core? What's the idea behind the product? And then we can kind of talk from there where it's gone in the last year and where it's going.
Great. So first I'm going to start with transferability, because it is fundamental to what we're doing here. So just briefly, the IRA is this massive piece of legislation. It will drive hundreds of billions of dollars into clean energy projects. We are seeing that the money that is going into clean energy and advanced manufacturing projects is being matched 5 times over by private sector investment in these projects and those capabilities. The mechanism that was used by the IRA is overwhelmingly tax credits. And the way that works is if you're a renewable developer, a manufacturer of solar components or battery components here in the United States, you will get tax credits that correspond to either your investment in the project or the production out of your facility, broadly speaking. And in most cases, the companies that get those credits don't have a tax liability to be able to consume them. So you build a $30 million solar facility, you get a $10 million tax credit, and you get paid for power for the facility over a very long period of time. And so you have a tax credit that does not match your tax liability, which creates the requirement that you find a partner to monetize that credit. Otherwise, the value deteriorates over time. So that has led to the formation of something that has been known as the tax equity market. It's about a $22 billion market as of last year, $23 billion. That market involves the investment of capital into assets, renewables assets, where the investor receives some amount of tax benefit, the tax credits that are associated with the project in exchange for their investment. They also receive depreciation and often a cash yield associated with that investment. That market has been essential. It remains essential. It's an important tool in the toolkit for clean energy finance. But what the IRA did was massively increase the number of credits that were coming to the system, and tax equity is inherently limited. So Congress created this new mechanism where now the credits can be sold directly for cash. So we started looking at that problem in the fall of 2022, started building in early 2023. And the fundamental concept that we had at the start was we wanted to make sustainable finance more efficient and interconnected. And we saw an opportunity with the tax credits to drive capital to these projects in a way that was much more scaled than had existed before, bringing in many more buyers to the system and leveraging the efficiency of these transactions. And really, that is what Crux is. It is the place where buyers, sellers, and intermediaries are able to connect and find each other. There are a lot of credits that are in the system. There are a lot of potential buyers that are in the system. The market threatens to be balkanized absent a venue where those parties can find each other. And so we are that. We are also the transaction management platform that is designed to help the parties navigate these transactions as efficiently as possible and close these deals so that the fundamental tool, the transferable credits, become a more powerful tool to encourage the level of development that we need. So we've raised about $27 million of capital for that. That has come from venture investors like QED, Lower Carbon, Overture, New System Ventures, and most recently Andreessen Horowitz in our Series A, but also strategic investors. We brought to the table some of the largest renewables and clean energy developers in the country, people like Ørsted, LS Power, that speak for very large amounts of renewables development. And with that money, we've built a great team that is doing transactions across the board in the space.
So if I were to kind of just distill it, functionally, you're first to market as a marketplace platform in this really exciting, booming market. It's very meta, but tax transfer market for the IRA and related tax credits.
Yes, that's right.
And I mean, a year ago, you had a kind of a sense of the total addressable market because there was projections as to how these projects might evolve. But a year out now, how big do you think this market is going to be or is looking like it's going to be, or how fast is it growing? What do we know now a year later about how projects are taking shape and like what this marketplace could look like over time?
So let me do a walk back from the level of investment that is anticipated in the space over the 10-year period subsequent to the passage of the IRA. And we have a couple of years of data here where we have seen a lot of building happen. But if you look at the longer arc, the projections, Goldman projects that roughly $3 trillion will be invested in clean energy and related manufacturing over the 10-year period. So by 2032. If you look at the contribution of tax credits into that $3 trillion, it will be something like 500 billion to 800 billion of tax credits that are projected to be originated over that period, projected to be earned over that period. And it's nonlinear. So it grows up pretty significantly as manufacturing capabilities grow here in the United States, as energy demand from things like AI continue to put pressure on the system, as renewable energy becomes more of a part of the mix. And so as all of those things happen, the scale of credits that will come to the market on an annual basis grows. And the best estimates on that from Evercore, which is most recent, have the market potential, so credits to be monetized, growing to over $100 billion a year by 2030. Now, there are embedded assumptions there, right? How much of that goes into the transfer market? How much of that goes into the tax equity market? Of the component that goes into the tax equity market, is some component of those credits later transferred? That's sort of a 201 topic, but is important. There is another mechanism of monetization where credits for a certain category and also for nonprofits, cities, and states can be taken to the government and redeemed for cash. That's the elective pay provision. So, when you look at more than $100 billion, there are assumptions to make on the amount that will be in transferable credits. But assuming that that is something in the neighborhood of $60, $80 billion a year, there's an enormous amount of supply coming to the market that will need to be met by a corresponding amount of demand in order for this market to remain efficient.
Yeah. And as you got in the first year, kind of going from the analyst research reports that kind of make this projection into the real world, where there's now, you guys have a marketplace up and running. You have folks on the demand side, folks on the buy side. How is it looking? Like, how do you feel about the actual volume of things that are coming onto the marketplace and in the pipeline? And again, knowing that this is nonlinear and that, in theory, exponential over the next 10 years as more projects take shape. But like year one, what does it look like now?
Yeah, so to put it in sort of a time series, the beginning of 2023 was a little harrowing if you're trying to start a platform for transferable tax credits because nothing transacted. So
Right.
we did not see transactions start to close until Treasury put out guidance in June of 23. And that guidance had a comment period which closed. And then starting in August and September, we started to see deals really accelerate.
Yep.
And the deals involved people that were not necessarily anticipated to come to the transfer market as early as they did. So there was a very material first deal that was announced between Invenergy and Bank of America, both very large historical players in the tax equity market, announcing that they were doing a transfer deal. And everybody sort of looked around and was like, oh, wow, maybe this transferability thing is much larger and more significant than we realized that it was. Towards the end of 23, I think the market began to coalesce on the opportunity for traditional tax equity and transferability to exist in concert with each other. I think the early concept was that it was a one-way door between one or the other. And now we're seeing substantially all partnerships that are put together to do traditional tax equity have an option to transfer the credits, and we're seeing many of those credits start to come to the market. So we did a market intelligence report that we published in January of this year covering the 2023 market. In that, we were able to identify $3.5 billion of specific transactions. We estimated that the market for 23 credits was $7 to $9 billion. That was much larger than other people had estimated that it was, and suggestive and supportive, again, that this market was accelerating really quickly. So where are we? We are now a team of 22 people. We have raised this $27 million to accelerate this market really quickly. We've done deals in solar, wind, standalone battery storage, bioenergy, 45X advanced manufacturing credits. We've done a few of those, including a number that we have publicly announced with Schneider Electric and Ryan. And we've done deals that range from 6 digits up to 9 digits and everything in between. And the buyers there range from family offices up to the Fortune 100. And again, that is really encouraging because what that shows is that smaller projects that never would have had access to the traditional tax equity market are having access or getting access through the transfer market and monetizing at reasonably competitive prices, all things considered. And it shows that the largest companies in the country, many of whom had not previously participated in the traditional tax equity market, are coming to this new transfer market, and we really need that.
And I don't want to force a prediction, but if you were to guesstimate, kind of given that we're maybe half your point right now, what do you expect your market intelligence report to look like at the end of this year in terms of comparison to kind of that first market intelligence report you guys put out at the end of last year that showed 23 was bigger than expected?
I think given the fact that the 23 volume essentially all happened after August of 2023, and we have a full year where we're also seeing growth in the sector, I think that it is very likely that our intelligence report for this year shows at least 2x growth in the transfer market.
Yeah. And you and I talked a little bit about this, but, key to any marketplace, or a key metric of marketplace health, many would argue, is how efficient the market can get. And in particular, you're adamant that what's impressive about the way that this market has advanced coming out of the IRA is that it's gotten pretty efficient pretty fast relative to other tax credit markets that have existed over a longer period of time. I'm curious if you could talk about that for folks, explain kind of how you're thinking about your own market efficiency and what you think that indicates about the health of these projects and this type of work in general.
Yeah, so I want to make a clarification. So we talk about this like a market, and of course it is. There's supply, there's demand, there are intermediaries that are making markets in various forms. But I think sometimes when you think about a marketplace, you think about sort of like a instantaneously settled, completely efficient and fungible transaction. This is not that. Right?
We're not on Robinhood.
No, we're not buying shares of stock. We're not on, Craigslist buying couches. We're doing multi-million-dollar, sometimes multi-$100 million tax credit transactions that hit the financial statement. And so there is a lot of underlying work that happens by smart people between A and B. And so what that looks like on Crux is that somebody will list credit for sale. They will receive bids through the system. Those bids are non-binding, but they include detail on what the buyer might be willing to provide in terms of price, what they will require in terms of things like insurance, what their closing timeline would intend to be. And all of those things inform the seller, who can then say, on the basis of these non-binding bids that I've received, I'm going to move forward with this party and that party, but not these other ones. And after they do that, they will upload NDAs into our system. They will meet each other. They'll upload required documentation into our purpose-built data room, which has features for easy engagement and allows for inviting advisors and insurers and other people that need to be around the substance of the deal. And then you progress towards close, sign a tax credit transfer agreement, and ultimately wire the funds, and the buyer takes possession of the credits and is often taking the benefit of that on their quarterly estimated taxes, usually even before the credit is closed. Now, in terms of efficiency, we are increasingly seeing credits that are desirable in the market, and that is a pretty wide swath of credit. So, everything that I would call above $10 million in size, certainly everything that is a production tax credit, things that are being built by developers that have great track records, where there isn't a lot of controversy around qualification, things that are in categories that investors know well. That segment of credits is seeing multiple bids pretty much immediately. So we did a deal with a utility seller of production tax credits. That seller received 12 bids on their 2023 and 2024 credits within 72 hours. They picked people, they progressed, they closed the deal in 22 days. And that kind of process where a seller is able to find the price, find the market, identify multiple buyers, and go through the most efficient closing process that is practical and possible given the dynamics of these transactions, I think is the goal here. And if we're able to do that, drive a lot of supply and demand across all of the different categories of credits, across lots of different sizes, and then we're able to close those deals quickly and responsibly with all parties knowing what they need to know in order to close it, then we get towards a much more efficient market than the one that we have historically had.
And I think there's probably two elements that I'm kind of curious about. One is, efficiency is a function or is a proof of kind of the business and the business's long-term prospects. And I think that seems like even in the premium cases, you've already proven the business has value, the platform matters. I guess what I'm kind of curious about, you've been around this ecosystem all the way back to the previous financial crisis and understand like the importance of private investment and how these markets are actually key to kind of the corporate side engaging. And so I'm curious, to me, listening to you talk about the market efficiency and the market health, this is an indicator of the fact that like corporate America and corporate investment is eager. And that's a really good sign for where we're looking to go in terms of building more clean and sustainable technology across the country. So I'm curious, like, if you take a macro perspective on the activity of the marketplace, what you think the tea leaves are showing about how corporate America, capital markets, how they're all looking at the potential of investments coming out of IRA, but more broadly, what that means for how they're thinking about investing in a sustainable future.
I think it's amazing if we look back on the last 15 years of clean energy development and kind of where we were when the Recovery Act was passed and those investments were made versus where we are today. And if you look at basically any measure of it, the level of power that is produced from clean energy systems, the composition that it represents across the country, the cost of key components in order to build these facilities, the capabilities to manufacture here in the United States, we're just a step function better than we were 10 years ago. And the data correspond to that. And as part of that, you've seen corporate America make very large investments in the space, right? There's a lot of effort to buy clean energy. There are large commitments that have been made by many large companies and even smaller ones. And with those commitments and that activity, that has really facilitated the acceleration of the broader market. Now we have another way in which corporations and individuals that meet certain characteristics are able to invest in clean energy projects. The government created this very large multi-$100 billion program where if you're a company and you would like to manage your taxes more efficiently and you would like to invest in domestic manufacturing or clean energy projects, you now have a tool to do that. And that's amazing because if more buyers come to this market, then the market will inherently be more efficient.
Yep.
More deals will close at higher prices and we'll build more stuff more quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard you talk about the IRA and the tax credit transferability created by that, but also the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bill is kind of the three pillars that have helped really reestablish American industry competitiveness when it comes to clean energy infrastructure. And I'm curious, again, like, given what you're seeing in your marketplace and through the conversations you're having with corporate America and capital markets America, what you think the progress of that looks like today and how you're feeling about, the evolution of domestic energy competitiveness.
Yeah. So just to start with the fundamental premise here, I think it is very hard to get your head around numbers that are in the trillions, right? Like it's hard to conceptualize as an individual person, even $1 billion. Like how far does $1 billion go on building facilities, right? How far does $100 billion go? How far does $1 trillion go? And the answer to that is $1 trillion goes a very long way, right? And we had these three very material pieces of legislation that were passed in reasonably short order: the infrastructure law, the CHIPS Act, and the IRA, all that in some way incentivize domestic manufacturing and the production of energy here in the United States. And, if you look at things like the infrastructure law has significant subsidy for hydrogen hubs here in the United States. And also, the Inflation Reduction Act includes production tax credits for hydrogen. So in some cases, the laws are multiplicative to one another. And the effect of that is that there is just an extraordinary amount that is getting built here in the United States. I mean, I have these conversations all the time where I meet a manufacturer of solar panels or electrical inverters or battery components, building in Georgia or wherever. And the conversation kind of goes like this. They're like, I have $5 million of 45X tax credits in 2023. I'll have $50 million in 2024. And by the end of the decade, we're going to be doing $1 billion a year, right? Like very significant expansion of capabilities as a result of the reshoring of these capabilities and the addition of significant amounts of clean energy to the system. And that is a direct line from the already exponential growth of the market that is now being catalyzed by trillions of dollars of support.
Yeah. I mean, are there other things or more things you think government should be doing to kind of further enhance the process, further enhance the growth, further support the private markets as they mature in this space?
Yeah. I mean, this is such a material evolution. We've never tried this before, right? Where you try to completely reform and add a ton more of different kinds of energy, some of which is more novel, into the system at the same time. And that requires all sorts of things. It requires a grid that can accommodate that energy. It requires, better and more efficient permitting of plants and systems. It requires investments in transmission. And, I think as we start to experience the exponential growth of all of these things here in the United States, I think we're going to experience strain on other parts of the system. And it will be important that Congress is responsive to that.
Yeah. I'm hearing this a lot from folks, especially in the economic development community. They're cheering new manufacturing facilities that they're winning in their states and then shutting the door and going, okay, oh my God, how are we actually going to power this? And then you've got, data centers popping up and the AI boom, and the demand side of the energy equation is not decreasing. It really is, I think, incentivizing folks to think creatively about how we supply in a better, more reliable, resilient way.
Totally. And Connor, all this stuff is so human and so physical.
Yeah.
Right? Take a solar facility. You're installing the panels and the steel in land, and people are doing that. And when these new manufacturing facilities are built, they require really specialized skills in order to manage them effectively. And so all of this development has a lot of requirements on the system, including making sure that we have enough people that are able to, work with the skill level required in the places that we need them in order to be able to build as quickly as we hope we can.
Yeah. And the other thing I hear a lot about, I'm curious for your take on it, is I mean, I've even seen quite a few reports in the last couple of weeks. Like you're hearing from industry, whether that's auto, legacy energy, the Chamber of Commerce at the national level. You've even got API saying,
Right.
do not
Yeah.
cancel these. Like no matter what happens in the next administration or the next Congress, what they really want to make sure of is through the political cycle that we're in right now, there's at least some level of certainty that the folks that are making these generational investments can have in that investment. The folks that are building these facilities or trying to invest in what will become the next generation grid, it's a 2030 or longer year time horizon on that investment. They need certainty. I'm curious how you're hearing or what you're hearing from folks on that end.
Yeah, it's critical. So, the industry grew up, and I previously referenced the 15-year period up to today. Over that 15-year period, clean energy tax credits were a prominent mechanism of subsidy that facilitated the development of wind and solar here in the United States. And those programs were extended by Congress on a shorter basis. So they would be extended by a year or 2 years. And the industry grew up with that level of uncertainty. And in light of that uncertainty, it's actually kind of amazing that the level of development that happened over that period was able to happen. And it shows that there was real market forces here. Now, that other dynamic is that total energy usage remained pretty flat,
right?
In part because of efficiency gains that were realized over that period. So we were able to increase the mix in the system that was coming from clean energy, but there wasn't really a requirement that we increase the amount of generation. Now, something very material has changed on that recently. Energy demand in the United States is starting to tick up, and that's a result of AI. It's a result of different behavior patterns. It's a result of the fact that a lot of the low-hanging fruit on efficiency has been picked. And so now we're in this place where if we're going to sustain the level of growth that we're going to experience, we need more, right? And the idea that you would, in light of that demand and that opportunity, take away a real catalyst for growing energy here in the United States and specifically clean energy, I think doesn't really make sense in light of the facts on the ground.
Yeah. It certainly seems that there's a pretty broad coalition of folks that have been taking that public posture. So it's good to see. I mean, are there big questions that you want to see answered in the next couple of years around the market, how it evolves, where it's going? Like what are you hoping to kind of, as you look to the horizon, understand about where we're going?
Yeah, I think the government, Treasury in particular, has done a really incredible job of putting out guidance in the right order that is in alignment with the statute and supportive to the market that we hope exists. The notice of proposed rulemaking on transferability was very supportive of the early market, as evidenced by the growth of the early market. The government just came out and stabilized those rules through the issuance of a final rule. And so that sort of investment and very high quality work has been really positive for the market. There are certainly some areas where the government still needs to weigh in further on the treatment of certain credits or the way that things will function in the system, but they're making really good progress. When I think about the next 3 to 5 years, I observe the tremendous growth that's going to need to happen in the system holistically, right? Getting from 7 to 9 billion to 50 billion, 100 billion is just an enormous amount of growth, right? So we need to figure out how to bring lots more corporate buyers into the system. That really requires these transactions being as standardized and efficient as possible, and there being really good tools to manage and mitigate risk around them. And I think as we do that, as we build that more efficient market, I think that we're going to see lots more opportunities to drive more efficient capital into these projects, because the tax credit represents, roughly speaking, a third of the capital stack, but the equity and the debt, principally the debt, make up the remainder of it. And it also, the way that the subsidy is structured and the fact that it is now transferable changes the way that some capital forms around these projects. And I think as we grow up as a space, there will be more opportunities for us to use these tools more efficiently and effectively to drive more capital in at lower costs.
As you look back at the last year or so, what have been any interesting or surprising takeaways as you've watched the market begin to get traction, as you've landed your first big deals and helped transactions occur? Like, what have been anything surprising or interesting that you didn't expect, that wasn't part of the business plan, perhaps, at the onset?
I didn't expect it to happen so quickly.
Yeah.
right? Like, it is very uncommon, maybe singular, that the government creates a program of this kind of size at a moment like this, where there's real technological innovation and a desire to change the way that we do things. And so that led to an extremely rapid formation of a more mature market. We're about a year past when the government put out the first notice of proposed rulemaking on these deals. A year ago, no deals had closed.
Right.
And now we're talking about all these different kinds of sophisticated structures and deals that are closing across all kinds of different credit categories and all kinds of different sizes and reasonably healthy, very healthy pricing observed across the board. And so I think there's real cause for optimism about what the next year could look like, right? Like if we maintain anything like the pace that we're on, both from a building perspective and a capitalization perspective, I think we're going to keep making things more efficient and keep driving down the cost of capital for people.
That was my next question. Is kind of where do you hope we are in a year? So that's like, we've already nailed that.
Yeah, I hope a year from now we are on track to doing what Goldman forecast that we would do.
Yeah.
That we're on track to building something like $3 trillion of energy infrastructure and manufacturing capabilities here in the US. I think that will be very strategic, very important, and it's just the right thing to do.
How big do you think you guys will be? I mean, we were talking again a couple of weeks ago. It feels like every day I'm seeing a new LinkedIn post that's excited to introduce a new member of the Crux team to the universe. What are you guys looking to expand to, and kind of where are you most excited to grow in the next year?
We really care about the mission that I said at the top. We are here because we want to make sustainable finance more efficient and interconnected. We see an opportunity to play a really constructive role in that. And one of the fun things about building centralizing infrastructure is that it drives a lot of benefit to the system broadly and people within it. And so we've been really lucky to convene some of the very best partners in the space around what we're building. People like American Clean Power. That's why, of course, Conor, we spoke at that conference together. We recently had announced this partnership with ACP where their 800 members will get access to Crux immediately and with a discount. And that kind of distribution, that kind of partnership helps us build more infrastructure more quickly in a way that should be to the benefit of the market broadly. And so to how big we get, I hope we continue to play a leading, innovating, centralizing role in a market that is going to grow by 5 to 10 times where it stands today. And I expect, 5 to 10 years from now, Crux is doing more than just facilitating the transaction of transferable tax credits. I think we are going to find more ways to drive capital into projects and manufacturing more efficiently than it is today.
In that world, if you were to kind of close your eyes and think about what it looks like, what does it mean for U.S. manufacturing? What does it mean for the movement towards a more sustainable and climate-friendly future for Crux to be in that position 10 years from now? What does the world actually look like?
Yeah, I think that the world with $3 trillion of investment in energy infrastructure and manufacturing capabilities is materially different than it is today. Much more of the power mix in the United States is coming from clean sources. And that is wind and solar and things like battery storage, which are so critical if we're going to add renewables to the mix. But it's also things like nuclear that are heavily incented by the IRA. And it's things like carbon capture, where if you can develop facilities that generate substantially less carbon because you're sequestering it and putting it underground, then we're adding power to the mix and we're keeping more carbon from getting into the atmosphere. And so I think that world is an optimistic world. It's one where America has more energy security. It's one where our power mix is more diversified. It's one where new technologies are accelerating, older technologies that are proven are scaling. And, we have built the capabilities to be able to build even more and even export abroad because we built such a strong domestic manufacturing sector for things like battery components. And I think that puts the country in a really strong place, and I think it's a very critical thing that we do for the next stage of the world. right? Like if we can lead on that and we can prove that it's possible and we can export abroad, then I think that we're giving the rest of the world more of a chance of doing it too.
Yeah. And I mean, you strike me as carrying with you day to day that optimistic perspective. As you think about kind of the world today and where we're at relative to that vision, where do you see the bright spots that are keeping you optimistic, that give you hope as you think about getting towards that future vision?
I think it relates to the fundamentals of building, right? Like the cost to procure just fundamental components to build a solar facility. It has been disrupted a bit from COVID, but if you look at it over a longer time series, back to 10 years ago, the cost of solar components is something like a tenth of what it was at the time. And you can make a similar point for other things. And I think what that presents is the opportunity for things to be better and cheaper. Like better from a cleaner perspective and just cheaper.
Yeah.
And, I think we've seen a bit of that in EVs, right? Where we're seeing EVs break records on, how fast they can go around a track or accelerate from 0 to 60, and they're clean, right? And if you can do that and you can make it less expensive, then why not, right? And I don't necessarily know what those things will be in what balance when we look 10 years from now. But I know that we've got so many bets that we're placing and that those bets are seeming to pay off in a lot of different places and in a way that encourages my optimism.
Yeah. And you had kind of said this again when we sat down in person. I thought it was such a smart observation, but we were sitting in a room of tens of thousands of humans, Americans, business leaders, employees, who were all working towards really innovative, interesting technologies and solutions and products and services that ladder up to this future. And it's like, I have the benefit of recording these conversations with interesting CEOs and business leaders every week, a couple times a week sometimes. And every single one reinforces this optimism that really smart, really passionate people like you are out there building really innovative companies that are solving problems and, have a goal of real sustainable business bottom line so that you can keep solving problems. For me, it's hard to not be optimistic when you have all these conversations with folks like you out there every day on the front line.
Well, that's kind, Connor, and I love discussing it with you. I always have a fun time doing it. Let me tell you sort of a fun story on how we got here. So when I left Treasury, the first thing that I did was partner with my friend, a founding advisor to Crux, and the founder of a firm called New System Ventures. And New System Ventures takes this extremely analytical approach to identifying what the biggest opportunities are for decarbonization and then investing in companies that are supportive of those big opportunities. And we would hang out at this place called New Lab in Brooklyn, which is amazing. It's a huge contribution there on the Navy Yard where some of the leading and most innovative companies are there. And I would walk around that facility and there was a company called Amegy building ammonia to X maritime vehicles.
We've had them on the podcast.
That's awesome. I'm proud to be a de minimis investor
Awesome.
in that company. And so I saw people like that company that were doing this unbelievably impressive scientific work like that. Yeah. And I was like, oh man, my background is financial markets, software, and the government. What am I possibly going to do here? And so we have built something that I hope is constructive. But when I go to a room, like the room that we were in Minnesota, that ACP convened, that Clean Power Conference that they put together, was such a incredible tour de force of what's happening in the industry. And you walk around and to your point, you see the kinds of components and the data that support just how much better they are than what came before them. And I don't think you can be anything but optimistic.
Yeah. Okay, last question. A lot's happened at Crux in the last year. I'm curious if you could, jump on a Zoom with yourself a year ago and kind of either give a preview or set expectations or incentivize or excite. What would you tell kind of the early days founder to get ready for, to be excited about, or what lesson would you want him to have in mind going into this project?
I think it's more about the people. And, just to be specific about that, a year ago, we had 6 or 7 people on the team. Now we've got 22 people on the team. We're growing from there. And I'm aware of a thing that I was aware of in my last company, which is you build software, and software, feels like it's bits on a computer screen.
Ones and zeros.
Yeah, ones and zeros. But the people that are building it are these like brilliant, highly motivated people that are looking at problems and figuring out how to solve them. And, I think the challenge that I always have at the front of my mind, and I'm reminding myself of today, I'd go from here into our team meeting, is how can we cultivate the right levels of creativity with the right level of focus, right? And really be analytical about what we are seeing in the market, what is working, what is not working, and then, be courageous enough to specify only a few things that we're going to do. And we haven't figured that out.
Yeah.
We still do too much stuff, and so like the advice that I give to myself a year ago is the advice that I give to myself now.
I love it. Huge thanks to Alfred for joining us on Consensus in Conversation this week. You can find out more about Crux at cruxclimate.com. We'll have all the links for you to connect with them on socials in the show notes. As always, you can email us at cic@consensus-digital.com. That's cic@consensus-digital.com. Or you can message me on LinkedIn or Threads at ckgaughan. That's at ckgaughan. Send us your questions, comments, or ideas for future guests. We love getting your feedback. Finally, if you've enjoyed the episode, please follow, like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen. It helps us to grow our reach and continue bringing you more awesome conversations with the business leaders you want to hear from. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next week with a brand new conversation. Consensus in Conversation is hosted and executive produced by me, Conor Gaughan. The episode was produced by Will Gatchell and Jeff Rock, with editing from the good folks at Reasonable Volume. Special thanks to the Consensus team, including creative director Kate Tucker, Greg Hergel on research, and Patrick Gallagher on strategy. Consensus in Conversation can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Consensus in Conversation is a podcast by Consensus Digital Media, produced in association with Reasonable Volume.